Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard time and again in this House that no Canadian will be left behind, and that sounds great. But how is it that we have the arrogance to think that our bureaucracy trickles down enough support to the average Canadian in ways that makes this statement true? That somehow these words make everything okay? That an overused phrase can add money to the debit card of a stressed out individual who's declined in the grocery checkout? That we have the hubris to believe that by creating a website, we can stop someone from taking their life when depression refuses to loosen its grip? That we have the audacity to believe that these words can find an appropriate, safe, affordable childcare spot so a mom can go back to work? I sit here and I listen to the same speeches being delivered by different members of the Liberal Party, proudly repeating the details of a new suite of programs, a new headache for public servants and the CRA, a new batch of confusion for our constituents who will be calling us to clarify and to answer questions, including how they will pay their rent or, say, internet costs during the waiting period for these new benefits to come into effect. Je suis honorée que dans le cadre...
I'm honored that as part of my responsibilities, I can help people navigate through the various government programs. Unfortunately, I don't always have answers to the many questions they ask me.
The most? When will the disability payment be released? You see, Mr. Speaker, I voted to support Bill C-2 to ensure immediate relief for persons with disabilities and a one-time payment, although inadequate, because they had been waiting long enough and they needed it so urgently. That was in July. Not only do we expect persons with disabilities to live far below the poverty line, with much less than we have deemed livable according to the CERB, but we also expect them to keep waiting, because all we've been told is to expect it in the fall. Well, it's fall, so I look to this government to finally deliver. Only then can I be happier with what's on the table now. Having said that, I will be supporting this bill, as we don't have much of a choice, since previous relief efforts have ended and Parliament was prorogued in the middle of a pandemic, as the second wave is hitting and as we send our children to school. I listened to the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader address this issue, suggesting that proroguing Parliament was no big deal, that it was only 5 weeks, and after sitting 3 short times in the summer, we should be happy with the level of engagement offered to us as opposition members. If you recall, I have been supportive of efforts of this government to involve us until this move to shut us out. Therefore, I reject the premise that this is not a serious issue because we were needed here in Parliament. We would not have allowed benefits to lapse, preventing us from being backed into a corner and rushing through this legislation. On the priorities of the bill, I am pleased to see changes to the EI criteria to allow Canadians to apply for benefits where they would not have previously been eligible. The 120-hour base floor is a welcome sight for the countless moms and pregnant women across this country who feared they would not meet maternity benefit eligibility. Although once again, this comes far too late after hearing their calls for help these past 7 months. This will also help those in the gig economy, artists, musicians, and so many others, those who we have also left hanging by a thread as we negotiate this bill. My Green colleagues, my NDP colleagues, have been pushing for a guaranteed livable income to help these same people. A GLI would eliminate the hoops and the burden of extra administration, as well as the associated costs. The most vulnerable, the perpetually left behind, would be financially okay. But here we are with a revamped EI program instead. Au moins, cela apporte réponse à certaines...
At least this will provide some answers to questions during these uncertain times, but I sincerely hope discussions will continue so we can definitively end poverty in our country.
About the threshold included in both the caretaker benefit and for paid sick leave. This has been promoted to Canadians as though they will receive 10 extra sick days to use as they wish. Well, this is not the case. For partners trying to share the caregiver benefit, we are removing options from them by insisting that only one of them takes enough days off to qualify for the benefit. I can already predict the calls my office will receive of parents in crisis, with a sick child at home and an ultimatum from an employer. I will also add that students are entirely left out of these new benefits. My Conservative colleagues were bringing forward the idea that our children will have to bear the brunt of our national debt and our relief spending. Considering these children will first need to live long enough for that to happen, it is clear to me that we must support survival above all else in these times. We need kids to have a roof over their head, food in their bellies, clothes on their backs, appropriate health services, a safe and healthy environment, and hope for the future. En effet, je souhaite que tous les Canadiens.
In fact, I hoped all Canadians have everything they need to survive and prosper.
Missing in this puzzle are targeted efforts for mental health supports, and I must sound like a broken record at this point. Les Canadiens ont besoin d'utiles.
Canadians need tools to be able to get through the next step and the winter that looks like it's going to be a tough one.
Is to tackle this head on with counseling services, individual training, and skill building to help others in our communities and to help ourselves. Money is not everything. Today, we need money in the hands of Canadians, especially the most vulnerable. But we also need compassion and an honest commitment to truly not leave anyone behind. I think about the thousands of Canadians who are still separated from their loved ones, their lifelong committed partners, their new loves in a foreign land, their adult children. They need us to listen to them and to act. It is time to reunite. These Canadians have been left behind, and I fear for their mental health as their hearts break with each passing day, and the silence from government leaves them more and more hopeless. So while we discuss proposed changes to the Labour Code, the Veterans Benefits Code, we cannot forget the human side of relief efforts. We support those who had the luxury of work and the luxury of a roof over their head, but this still leaves people out. Cette loi ne résout pas tous les problèmes.
This act doesn't fix all the problems that Canadians are facing.
I look forward to a bill that addresses the toll being taken on the resiliency and well-being of Canadians since the beginning of this pandemic. One that addresses the deep divisions in our country, the social inequalities, the rampant poverty, the racism. We can make the changes we need in Canada during COVID and beyond, but we must do it together. No more games, no more platitudes. We need transparency, we need collaboration. We need our government to demonstrate that through their leadership. And I am waiting for that day. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for such a thoughtful speech, and I have a lot of respect for her, the member from Fredericton. She talked about a speech about the hope people had. People had a lot of hope after this, during this COVID pandemic, that the government would come out with a completely different response, a response that created a new normal, a better future for everyone. And she talked about how it's played out for people in her riding, the mental health issues. And her and I sit on the all-party mental health caucus, Mr. Speaker, advocating for people that are struggling with mental health issues. But she also cited a guaranteed livable basic income. And Mr. Speaker, why they're tied together is maybe she can speak about the importance of that in supporting people that are struggling and what happens when people can't make their ends meet, Mr. Speaker, and what happens to their mental health, and how important it is that we as leaders pull together and put programs together so that people don't fall through the cracks. And Mr. Speaker, maybe I'll ask the member to speak to that. Thank you.
Honourable member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for that wonderful question. And I'm very passionate about GLI for multiple reasons, and it's mostly because of the conversations that I have with constituents day in and day out, that oftentimes when we get to a point in that conversation where through our regular channels, I have no way to help them. And I can only hope that our government will move on something like a GLI because it catches so many people. It really is that social safety net. I think it's the next step for Canada. I think it's something that we could really be proud of, that we could champion. And you're right, this was a time, this is a missed opportunity, I feel, to totally reinvent Canada, to really provide that hope for Canadians, to have a bright outlook for the workforce, for the economy, for the environment. We had that opportunity, and it was squandered. And I'm usually far more positive in this House, and I don't want to, not give Canadians the idea that I'm not optimistic still. But I'm just a little disappointed with how we've gotten to this point. And I believe in a minority parliament, and I believe in what we can do, but we need to listen to each other. And so many of us are saying a GLI would really help. A guaranteed livable income would very much help our constituents right now and for days to come, for years to come. So I'm very encouraged to hear even members of our sitting government to suggest that they're on board with this. I hear there's conversations around the cabinet table, so I look forward to that coming to fruition. Thank you.
Questions and comments.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Davignon, Matisse, Matin, Lapidia. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I always appreciate my colleague from Fredericton's speeches. They're very touching and very real. And I also I'm starting to feel fed up with the answers we've been hearing from the Liberals. Even though they have the same concerns as us, they always put forth the same statements. We talked about social inequity and hope for the future, and I know her party has many points in common with the Bloc Québécois in terms of a green recovery. And there's a whole question of telling the government that it has to stop investing in dirty oil, in polluting energy sources. And does her party agree with this proposal, the honourable member for Fredericton?
I thank my colleague for that question as well and her kind words. I mean, obviously, that's a huge piece of this opportunity that I was talking about. It seems that we try not to follow the trends. We try not to follow the good business advice that's being offered by experts, that this is absolutely a direction that we need to go to, is to focus more on renewables. We still need oil and gas in this country, but we know we need to ramp down our demand and invest in renewables. It goes hand in hand. I don't think that we need to choose one or the other at this point. We know that those skills are transferable for workers who are in the oil fields. I want to bring New Brunswickers home from Alberta because I want renewable energy options out here as well and on the East Coast. So I just, I'm very passionate about seeing those things come to fruition, and I'm tired of hearing those words in speeches without actions that make sense, or with one thing coming, a climate crisis in one side of the mouth and then buying a pipeline in the next, when we're instead trying to be ramping down that demand that I'm talking about. So it's confusing, and I've said that before about the messages that the Liberals are giving to Canadians. It's very confusing when it comes to the idea of environment and the climate crisis. So I'm looking for clarity, and that's why I spoke in this speech about transparency and about that collaboration piece, because it sounds like we want the same things, but when we come to this place to vote on bills, it's not what we fought for, and I need to see more of that. Thank you.
Resuming